um, what we had started yesterday, and then we went back to the Imrei Yaakov, which was the halacha that really does come up very practically speaking for a ketubah. If the witnesses themselves don't understand the text, they're not allowed to sign on a text. And this happens all the time. Is that, you call up a guy, he's your buddy, he's from, but he's not exactly an expert in Aramaic. And you ask him to sign the ketubah, and he sure says, sure, I'll go ahead. Or the Tanaim document. They don't bother reading it. They trust the Masadar Kiddushin, that it's what it says it is, right? So the Rav Shulchan Aruch says that Ein Rishoyim Lachtom Ad Sheyikra'uhu Tchila Mila B'Mila. They're not allowed to sign witnesses until they read the contract word for word. The Avinu Heitev Kol HaKasuv Bo. They have to understand well what its contents are. And if they can't, the next thing that the Rav Shulchan Aruch says is that if they can't understand it themselves, they should call over two other people who can read it and explain it to them, so that they act as sort of auxiliary aidim, right? And only then should they sign it. But even that's not a lechatchila situation. That lechatchila, it's never appropriate to procure aidim who don't understand what the contents of the ketubah are. Okay, so let's take a look at the Imrei Yaakov. Ein Rishayim Lachtom, Aval. So he writes, Aval Rosh Beistin, Shehu Yodeya Inyan Hashtar, V'kara Lefanav Hasofer Shalo. But let's say a person is the head of a Beistin, and he knows the general contents of a shtar, and the sofer reads the contract to him. Hoel v'hu mamin lo ve'emaso alav, since he trusts the scribe who wrote the document, and the scribe has a reverence for him that he knows he's not going to lie. Then in that situation, you're allowed to sign a contract even if you didn't read it yourself. Now, who's he quoting from? He's quoting from the Shulchan Aruch itself. Okay? So, v'lo havi ke'ed mipi eid. And it's not considered to be like hearing from one witness from another. D'mayri shaharosh beistin ra'a ha'edus, because ve'ein hasofer ba ela lahudia shekach kasav b'shtar. So here we're talking about a situation that a contract was already signed, and the head of the Beis Din needs to hear the case and hear, let's say, the merits of a case that come before him, where Ruvain says that Shimon owes him money. So Ruvain presents a promissory note. It's not necessary for the head of the Beis Din, who's presiding over a case, to read the promissory note inside, as long as his scribe or his assistant reads him the contents and he sees the witnesses' signatures. The scribe is only there coming to tell him the contents, not necessarily, not the signatures of the witnesses. And this also is based on the fact that once a contract is brought to the public sphere, it'll eventually be exposed for what it is. And therefore, we assume that anyone who's reading it out loud is not lying. L'kach himnuhu afilu lo kara'o ba'atzmo keven de'emaso alav. And therefore, we believe the scribe or the secretary of the Beis Din to read it in front of the dayan or the dayanim, even when they don't read it themselves, because he reveres these dayanim and he's not going to lie. Aval sha'ar ha'am, o afilu rosh Beis Din im sofer acher einam rashoim lasos kein lechatchila. But everybody else, and even the head of the Beis Din, but it's a different scribe. It's not his secretary, but it's a completely a person who doesn't work for the Beis Din. They should not do this lechatchila. Afilu im shnaim acherim karim lifnehem, even if two other people read the contents and explain it to them. Avol b'di'evid kasher, but b'di'evid it's kosher. V'lachein im ein ha'edim mevinim lashon hashtar, v'acherim tirgamu lahem v'chasmu al zeh yesh lahachsher b'di'evid. And therefore, if two witnesses do not understand the language of a shtar, but two other people explain it to them, translate it for them, and then these witnesses, based on the translation, sign on the shtar, then the shtar is kosher b'di'evid. Let's go on, because then after this I want to show you a few other sources. Shehem kesherim, ayin la'el sif zayin geder kesherim. We talked about what constitutes a kosher witness. She'ein yodim likros, adam shechasam al shtar, af shebarur she'enu yodei likrosa. If a person signs on a shtar, even if everyone knows that he doesn't know the translation of the contents, mikol makom mischayev b'hu b'chol ma shekasuv bo. He is nonetheless, if he is a party to signing on a contract, he becomes liable for the contents of the contract, even if he didn't bother reading it, like Marvin was talking about yesterday, and even if he doesn't know what it says. The reason is that since he didn't bother reading it, and he relies instead on whoever's putting the contract in front of his face, then he is essentially trusting that the contents of the shtar are accurate, and he's obligating himself to all of the terms of the contract. And similarly, if someone, now he's getting into the laws of ksuva, he says if a man divorces a woman and she presents him with the ksuva, now in chutz la'aretz today, there's a standard amount that's recorded. And generally what happens in divorce cases today is that a woman does not collect on her ksuva. It's somewhere in the area of about $15,000 to $20,000, could be even up to $30,000, depending upon the fluctuating price of silver. But it's a 5-figure sum. It's not an exorbitant amount. The reason why the Beis Din tears up the ksuva in front of the woman, making sure that she acknowledges that she cannot collect on the ksuva, is because the Beis Din assumes that there's a divorce settlement of financials that are worked out before the get is being delivered. And so those financial arrangements almost invariably exceed the value of the ksuva. Okay, so that's the reason why the Beis Din tears up the ksuva. But let's say now in Eretz Yisrael today, they put in significant sums of money in American dollars. So typically, you could have a situation both in Sephardic and Ashkenazic circles where the ksuva is drafted with an Israeli family. They will sometimes put in dollar amounts. They'll put in $250,000. $500,000, right? In other words, upon termination of this marriage, this woman collects a significant sum of money, and it's real issues, right? So let's say a man signs on to a ksuva like that, not signs on, but makes a kinyan in front of witnesses and it obligates himself to that amount, and then he claims, even though they read the ksuva publicly, under the chuppah, the man then claims, I was just getting married. I didn't obligate myself to the terms. Ein shomin lo. We don't pay attention to that claim. Afilu yadua she'eino mevin lashon hashtar, even if it's clear that he didn't understand the language of the ksuva. Mikol makom mischayevu bekach kevin shekibel al atzmo b'shasa. But he obligated himself, and he was silent when committing himself to those terms. Because really what he should have said at the outset was, Um, I don't understand all of this legalese, or I don't understand Aramaic or whatever his claim is. I want you to explain to me every single clause. The kaven shelo asakein amrinan d'chol shtika binyanim elu havaleka kabbalah. And if he failed to do so, then what we say is that his silence is tacit acceptance. Shekibel alav l'kayim masha hasofrim noagim lichtov b'shtaros of ksubas of adiktukein. That he accepted upon himself what is standard practice to write in ksubas. Va'av shelo chasam atzmo laksuva rak ha'idum chasmu achar shekibel al atzmo b'kinyan. And this is true even if he himself did not sign the ksuva, which is general practice, but rather witnesses signed onto it after he made a kinyan, which is an expression of his acceptance of the terms of the ksuva. Now, that's if it's a standard ksuva. What if it's a non-standard ksuva, right? So let's say someone were to try to do a $500,000 ksuva here in Toronto. So that would become more complicated because a person could legitimately argue, now wait a minute, someone pulled a fast one on me. I thought this was a standard ksuv of Masayim Zuz, 200 Zuz, which is all right, $15,000, $20,000, $25,000. You're telling me that I committed myself to $500,000 and no one told me about this? That would be a legitimate claim, and he would be able to use that argument. So now I'm going to tell you a story. It's written in Aramaic. Masayim Zukukim Kesef Tzaruf. And then Od Masayim Zukukim Kesef Tzaruf, right? No, the Meya Zukukim Kesef Tzaruf and another Meya Zukukim Kesef Tzaruf. So it's Masayim Zukukim Kesef Tzaruf. 200 purified silver coins, or 200 zuz, right? It's a certain amount of silver, but doesn't exceed $30,000 Canadian. So I'm going to tell you a story that happened with me a number of years ago. I was asked to officiate at a wedding. Why was I asked to officiate? These were not members of my shul. This was in Los Angeles. This was a young lady that I'd become friendly with because she attended my Daf Yomi shir. Really interesting situation. I was giving a small Daf Yomi shir, and this woman called me one day and she said, would she be allowed to attend? You know, she'll sit at the far end of the table. She won't disturb anybody. I said, like, why are you interested? So it turns out that she was an Israeli girl. She was she came from a Haredi family, absolutely brilliant young lady, and was doing postdoctoral research on neuroscience at UCLA. Just off the charts brilliant, okay? And just to prove to you that she was off the charts brilliant, like whenever I forgot a Gemara and I said, you know, where was that Gemara? And she would know where it was. So she would quote it back to me. So like off the charts brilliant, okay? So she was at the Daf Yomi shir, so she got engaged to this very nice fellow. I have no idea if they're even still married. Based on the story I'm about to tell you, I haven't kept up with her because she moved somewhere else, and I don't know to this day if she's still married. But in any event, I would presided over the wedding. I met her parents came in from Bnei Brak a few days before the wedding. Father sat down with me and told me, here's the ksuva that we're going to use. And it had a $250,000 price tag in the ksuva. And I said to him, I'm sorry, Rabbi so-and-so, but we don't do that here in California. We don't do in Chutz La'aretz, we don't put in dollar amounts. We just have a standard 200 zuz ksuva. That's the way we do it, you know. And I'm not going to be able to preside over the wedding if you're going to insist upon this, because he was becoming quite pushy, you know. And I said, listen, take it back to your daughter, ask her what she wants to do, but this is not going to work for me, you know. I wish I had been Canadian back then. I would have even said it even more nicely. I'm saying it to you now like a Canadian, but I probably pushed back a little bit more back then. Anyway, uh, finally he accepts. Okay. So we get to the wedding and everything's ready to go. We're at the Chossen's Tish. And all of a sudden he pulls out the other ksuva thinking that I'm not going to notice. Yeah. He wanted to do the old switcheroo. And he thought, I don't know what he was thinking. He must have thought, oh, he's just an American rabbi. He probably knows nothing. I can probably pull the switcheroo on him. So I said, no, this is not going to work. I already told you we can't do this. And I was probably quite irate at that point. I'm trying to recall. I am not as calm. I was not as calm back then as I am today. So I was probably quite irritated. I notified both the chassan and the kala what was going on and that we couldn't go forward if he was going to insist on this ksuva. It delayed the wedding by about 90 minutes, and they were this close to canceling the wedding. And what do you mean? Yeah, the chassan had no idea, but things were already tenuous between himself and his future in-laws because he was a young man from Australia living in LA, and also like this was all foreign to him. His parents were Chabad and they were Haredi Litvish from Bnei Brak, and it was just like it was oil and water. It was really, really very, 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 very not good. So eventually the young lady was able to calm everything down, and with a lot of talking and a lot of going back and forth, they went ahead with the regular ketubah as I had presented. Her father finally backed down. And then the saga continued, but that's all you need to know for now, is that this was a real story. Now, what I want to tell you is that a number of years ago, I'm going to try and bring it up on my files, I gave a shiur on this very subject of whether it is halachically permissible to have witnesses sign let me just see. No, so it's not under here. I'll have to find it for you. No, I'll find it for you, Mirza Shem, for tomorrow. I'll get you the shiur. The poskim do discuss this issue quite seriously. Is it okay for two witnesses? And the conclusion of some poskim is that the reason why it has become custom to read the ketubah under the chuppah. Now, halachically, there's no requirement to read the ketubah under the chuppah. There's absolutely no requirement at all. But some poskim have argued that the reason why we do it is in a situation where the witnesses themselves do not understand the text of the ketubah and have signed on to it. The reason why we read it publicly is alluded to in the language of Rav Stern and the Imrei Yaakov. The fact that it has become public knowledge means that the witnesses have signed on to a document where, even though they haven't read it, they trust the fact that now that the public knows about it, it gives the ketubah the authority of a public acceptance, and that's what makes it kosher. Even when the witnesses themselves don't understand it, but the public now is aware of it, and that makes it legal. The problem is that a lot of times the public don't understand. And also it's important to know that sometimes we misread the ketubah deliberately. At Sephardic weddings, the ketubah is a lot of times so lengthy, like it's like the Castilian custom, right? Really, seriously, it says, this ketubah is done according to the minhagim of Castilia, and it's got like so much added text in it that the person who's the Masader Kiddushin has told me in the past, oh, just read the first lines and then the last lines. You have to read the whole thing. And then, and then there are other times when there might be information in the ketubah where the girl it's not her first marriage, or she's a giores, and we don't want that to come out. So we change the reading in public from what it actually contains. So a lot of this is very tenuous, but Emir Tzashem, I will get you that shir that I gave. I just have to look it up and find it. Okay. All right. So let us go on. We'll just start the Sif Chaf Beis. Utzrichim ha'idim lachtom ba'atzmam. The witnesses have to sign their names themselves. Remember those old TV shows where the guy would sign his name with an X because people were illiterate back then? Yeah, the Westerns. Yeah, prospecting for gold, and then the guy would sign the old miner. Yeah, yeah. You're John Hancock. That's it. Yeah. Oh, John Henry? John Hancock is the largest. Yeah, I've only heard John Hancock. You've heard John Henry also? Okay. All right. All right. So the witnesses have to sign the document themselves. Let's say a guy doesn't know how to sign his name. And this is very common, especially when there's illiteracy. And it's also prevalent even today. Let's say a fellow is quite literate in English, but doesn't know how to sign his name in Hebrew. And he tells someone else, you sign on my behalf, and here I'm giving you the pen. So it's almost like you're acting as my representative. Ein ze klum. That doesn't count. Shaharei zeh ke'ed mipi eid. Because that's like one witness testifying based on another witness's testimony, which is not kosher. Ve'ein sarach lomar, imitzav el eid hasheni she'ein kan ela eid aleph, eid echad. And that's for sure true if he tells the other witness to sign his name on his behalf. Turns out there's only one witness on this document. There's not two witnesses. Aval im hamitchayev ba'atzmo chotem al hashtar kamo shenogim achshav. But let's say instead of two witnesses that are required for this contract, the party of interest on this contract himself is the signatory, which is very common today, where instead of witnesses signing, the person himself signs in order to commit himself. Ve'ena yodea lachtom. and he does not know how to sign. And the convention of where we are is for the person, the person himself who's committing himself to the terms of the contract to sign. And he said, instead of signing himself, he gives the pen to somebody else and says, "Here, sign on my behalf." Ubeis edim chasumim tachteha, and two other witnesses sign beneath it. Lakaim shazuhi chasimaso shetziva lachtom b'mesiras hakulmus areza shtar kasher. He says, as long as two witnesses sign it on the bottom of his signature to verify that he authorized the terms of this contract, then that's a kosher. Then that is kosher. So either he doesn't have to sign it all and just make a kinyan, or let's say instead of making a kinyan, he says, "I'll sign the shtar." But he doesn't know how to sign, so he asks someone else to sign on his behalf. And the witnesses signed beneath that they were witness to the fact that this fellow had someone else sign for him. So then that's a valid shtar, even if it doesn't say explicitly that the witnesses saw someone else signing on his behalf. So that is going to be kosher. So what I'll do is I'll hold it here for today. I'll get you that information, Amir Tzashem, for tomorrow, and then we'll continue. Okay.